So I think we all look good, sound good. Everyone ready to kick off the show? All right, let's start this thing.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, to the January AppSec Roundup. It's our first roundup of the new year. We're excited to have you all here.
Here to talk AppSec and mostly talking about the this overriding theme of automation of application security. One of the things that interests me a lot is how enterprise software development is tying in so much more with Infosec. So there's going to be a lot of that today. It should be really interesting.
That's the cool thing I'm looking forward to also is there used to be there's a difference between the development side and the security side. Like there's pen testers and then there's developers, and they didn't talk very much. And that's kind of what OWASP was all about, I think, was trying to bring those people together. And now with all the automation and the ability to do some security stuff like for real as part of the life cycle, I think that's opening doors.
Absolutely. Evangelizing application security to developers is the short form of the OWASP mission. And it is definitely a difficult task, but it is getting easier as we continue to have questions and breaches related to applications. The developers are starting to notice. So on the development side, they're getting more serious about wanting not only the defense mechanisms in place other than just some blinky light box sitting out front, but also actually building security into their applications. But then they want to understand how to test their own application security. And we're going to cover both of those things today, starting with the testing side of things. But on the Infosec side, something that interests me is this trend towards. So when I first started getting involved in security, 12, 15 years ago, pretty much all the development that was being done on the Infosec side was being done via, script, bash files, Python, little bits of things. Mm-hmm. But now more and more, there's real enterprise scale development going on using source control and real user interfaces to make things easier to work with. Whereas before, that wasn't the case. It was just a bunch of scripts hacked together and then tossed on GitHub and forgotten about. But these days, it's much more like actual professional development. So we're seeing this need for security-aware software developers coming in and actually helping the security people write this software and get their processes in place. Because on the development side of things, we have all these processes too, right, Brian?
Yep.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's neat to see the interest coming in on both sides. Like I started in AppSec, it was about 12 years ago too. And it was very much like the developers did their work and the security people did their work. And it was like, hey, I got this report for you. Here's all these problems. And the developers are like, I don't know what HTTP only is on a cookie. What are you talking about? And it's gone from kind of a break fix type thing. Like you're going to do all your development and then send it to security people. And then they're going to give you a list of all the things they found wrong with it. And then you're going to, do something with that, and we'll do it again next year. And now there's more communication going on. There's more openness, I think, from both sides, really, because we didn't know what each other did before. We would both think, gosh, those developers don't know what they're doing, and these security people don't know how people work, and we're getting better. We're getting better about that.
And you came at this from the network side. When you and I met quite a while ago now, you were primarily a network person, and we're dealing with, if I remember correctly, TLS issues.
Yeah,
Throwing chairs through windows and stuff.
Yes. Heartbleed was very exciting for me at two different companies.
You had to go and deal with developers every single day and talk about, the fact that you gotta put your cascading style sheets under HTTPS just like anything else. Otherwise, the browser is going to throw an error. And we've got to update these certificates, and we've got to move to this version. Get off SSL 3. That's how long ago this was, by the way. And man, every day it was just red face.
Right.
Very
Yes.
difficult, but it's gotten a lot better now.
The conversations are way better, way more common ground than we used to have. Mike, hey, welcome.
Hello. Hello. To say, you guys just gave the whole gist of my talk just now, so you just more or less freed up the whole 3 o'clock hour. So I will I'll see myself out here.
That's always the danger with pre-show banter is like, we don't have a script for this, so let's not cover everything we're going to cover
No,
later.
you're good.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying not to tell my Simon Bennett stories.
Bill mentioned CodeMash. So CodeMash is a developer conference in Sandusky, Ohio, up near Lake Erie. And that's the first place I gave like public teaching. I did a web app pen testing class for developers at CodeMash. And it was such an eye-opener because the things that a security person sees and lives with every day sometimes are news, like actual news to developers. Like they didn't know that that was there or that that was possible. And to spend a whole day with them, showing them what I see when I do my job and having them go, wow, that's different than what I see. I learned a ton from them, and I hope they learned some stuff from me too. But CodeMash it's the reason I wanted to talk about that, because it's a conference focused on development, but there's a security track, and so that's a great place to kind of cross boundaries there. If you're a security person and you're interested in apps in development, look for developer conferences and go there as a security person, and you can give just the most basic talk about what you do for security. You don't have to impress anybody with your cool new 0 days, just basic stuff. What are the tools you use? What are the things you look for? And that will be news to a lot of the developers, or at least something they don't spend a ton of time in. And it'll be interesting to them, and you'll start building bridges. You'll start understanding what developers think when they're doing things. And it's never, it's too easy as a security person to go, gosh, these developers don't know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing. They're building applications that people want to use. They're doing awesome, cool things. And security is only one aspect of what they need to pay attention to. So you can help them focus on that and still make cool stuff that people want to use.
I've been involved in CodeMash for going on probably about 8 years now. And when I first started there, I mean, there would be maybe 25 people in the room when a big name security person was talking, like Dave Kennedy, Jack Dan. I mean, big name people in the industry talking. There'd be 20 people in the room, right? And over the last 8 years, I mean, those rooms have filled up more and more. The training sessions, you're getting 100, 200 people, if not more in those now. The rooms are filling up to capacity. So it's really the security track of CodeMash has really taken off here in the last couple of years. So.
And it's not just CodeMash either. We've got, I mean, developer conferences all over the United States and the world are starting to pick up on that exact trend. Mike and Brian and myself have played a big role here in Ohio with the trends here. We have a conference that we run in Columbus called Stir Trek that was originally based on Microsoft Mix. It was like a local version of Microsoft Mix. And Jeff Blankenberg runs that, and he asked me to start a security track for that one. And at the beginning, nobody really came, but now it's there once they like Mike put it out, it's completely full. And it's kind of a cool conference. We hold it in the movie theater. And then at the end, we catch whatever the summer blockbuster is. We didn't get to do it last year. Hopefully we do this year. And I remember one of the first turnover ones was Phil Grimes. It goes by Grape Ape on Twitter. He gave a talk on cross-site request forgery. And I thought, all right, no one's going to even know what that is. But he wrote an extremely compelling abstract. And I'm looking over my shoulder in this movie theater. I mean, literally a movie theater is full of software developers. So I'm introducing him. I do my normal thing. It's like, okay, how many people are software developers? Check out code in the morning, check it in the evening, and that's what you do. Every hand went up. And it's like, okay, all right. Well, I think we've turned a corner here. So that merger is really starting to work. And I'm very pleased about that in general. I really am.
Awesome.
It looks like Simon has joined us. I know you guys had mentioned him previously, so welcome,
Hello,
Simon.
Simon.
Hey, Simon.
Hi. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
Oh my gosh, I love your accent. It's great.
Good job on that.
Okay, my work here is done.
Yes. Mic drop.
Yes.
I completely agree with what you've been saying about getting to developer conferences. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago I stopped going to security conferences to focus on developer ones. I found it really useful. And I found it great as well because, I've got a load of really great developer talks. You find out new things. So I've really enjoyed it, but it's just, meeting people, meeting developers and, just explaining the basics. But then, over the last few years, being able to explain more and more. Obviously, I'm talking about Zap. But it's, I really think more security people should be going to developer conferences and talking there and talking to developers and finding out what their concerns are and realizing that, as has already been said, that security isn't everything. They've got other concerns on their minds.
We were talking about how enterprise software development is becoming more of a thing within the security industry too. You're a great example of that. You're building an enterprise quality software package in open source, but still, I mean, you've got test suites, you've got real honest to goodness source control. You've got a user interface that is up to date and using the proper standards from the UX perspective. And even doing some new stuff like the new heads-up display, that's new in InfoSec in the last 5 years or so, is this trend towards real enterprise development, not a bunch of cobbled together scripts. It's very exciting to see. I
was an enterprise developer. Yeah, that's my background.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to stop breaking apps and start building them here pretty soon. I'm starting to feel guilty.
So you're talking about Zap, right, Bill?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so Zap is the Zed Attack Proxy, which it took me a long time to realize that Zed is just what an American would call Z. I thought it was a name. I thought it was named after somebody. But it's just
he'll explain that in his talk probably.
Do you know why it's called Zed?
I do not.
I wanted Zap to be in capitals because it originally came from kind of the idea of cartoons, Zap Pow and things like that. So I wanted it to be capitals. I kind of avoided having the exclamation mark. I was really tempted. But the easiest way for it to be in capitals is to make sure it stands for something. So it's actually a backronym. So P, proxy, it's easy. A, attack, it didn't take me long to work that out. Z, that was harder for me. But I'm sorry, I didn't want Americans calling it the Z Attack Proxy. So I took the leaf out of the Led Zeppelin, which was, would have been LEAD, Lead Zeppelin. Z stands for Zed.
Nice. I love it.
Very, very good. And for the record, I spent a decade telling people incorrectly that it was based on Peros proxy, which I learned recently is wrong. That when Simon wrote it, he started from scratch.
No, it's based on Peros.
Yep. Maybe I got that backwards. He said he started from scratch based on Peros, which was the proxy that we used 100 years ago to do web testing.
Yeah, it was Peros and WebGoat. That's how you learned.
WebGoat, yeah.
So I want to tell a story about Simon, if I'm allowed to, before he takes over. Been using Zap for a long time, and it's phenomenal software. But little did I know how much of a community-minded person the developer is. You look at a product like OWASP ZAP, and I'm sure there'll be a demo in here somewhere. You think that there's like a team of 900 people building it. And in a small way there is. Even I've committed a couple of pull requests, but really the entire thing sprung fully formed out of Simon's forehead. And he is the core of it all. So for those of you who were earlier, we talked about CodeMash, and it's a developers conference in Sandusky, Ohio, up by the Lake Erie. And I started the security track there probably 10 years ago. And Mike Woolard, who was on earlier, if you were on the Banter, took over. And so we're looking for speakers and whatnot. And so he shoots an email. Simon is like, "Hey, you got someone who can come talk about OWASP ZAP?" And Simon says, "Sure, me." So he flies from the UK over to little teeny Sandusky, Ohio, to speak to a couple of hundred devs about ZAP, and then it hangs out, participates in the whole conference. shows people. I find him sitting at tables with his laptop with a handful of developers behind him, showing them things and stuff like that. It was very community minded and a phenomenal developer on top of it. So Simon, thank you very much for agreeing to do that. And it was the same thing that happened here. I said, hey, do you have anybody who can maybe talk about the automation features in Zap or, anything else related to it? He says, yeah, me. It's like, oh, for crying out loud, this is so awesome. So an AppSec royalty in the house. Thank you very much, Simon. I'll let you take over and drop some knowledge.
Thank you a lot, Bill. It was great fun turning up to those things. And I do want to point out, as you said, there's a team of people behind Zap. I don't think I'm even actually the biggest contributor anymore. I think Ricardo, THC202, has taken that from me. None of the rest of the core team are that keen on presenting, so when it comes down to presenting, it tends to be me quite a lot of the time. This is a session on automating Zap, so I'm not really going to explain how to use Zap. Hopefully you know that, or there are plenty of other videos explaining that if you don't yet know. My name is Simon Bennetts. I released Zap just over 10 years ago. So I'm project lead, one of the project lead now, and I work for a company called StackHawk, who are building a service on commercial service on top of Zap. So in this talk, I'm going to give a quick overview of Zap. Then I'm going to talk about configuration, and I'll explain why I'm talking about configuration when I get there. But then I'll get on to the meat of the talk, which is showing how you can automate Zap. So I'll show you the command line, quick scan, the package scans, and then GitHub actions, and finally I'll talk about the API and daemon. It's kind of difficult when you talk about automation. Demoing isn't quite as straightforward as when you've got a GUI. So I will actually have the GUI up for a couple of times, but I will try and demo as much as possible. Quick introduction, what is Zap? So it is a tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. It is an OWASP flagship project, so these are the projects that are kind of most mature and the ones that OWASP recommend you get started with. And like all OWASP projects, it is completely free and open source. It's cross-platform, so as long as you can get a JVM running on it, then Zap will run on that. And it is well maintained. And I kind of make this point because over the last 10 years, I've seen quite a few open source web scanners kind of come and go. And there's a lot still referenced, but very few are actually being maintained now. So Zap has been maintained very actively over the last 10 years. And if anything, even more changes are happening to it and more support is going on than ever before. But finally, I've got to say it is probably the world's most frequently used web scanner. It's definitely the most popular open source web scanner, but we're pretty sure it's the most frequently used web scanner, including all the commercial ones. We kind of went public on this with a blog sometime last year, and I might have pointed some of our competitors to it, and no one's cared to challenge us on that, so it must be true. Zap is for developers and functional testers. That's what I aimed it for initially when I released Zap. And we find it's very good for students as well. So if you're a developer or functional tester and you want to actually make sure that your web applications are secure, and I hope you do, then Zap could well be the only security tool you need. And students likewise, Zap is great for students because you can look at source code and you can get involved. So we actually have on the website a student hall of fame of all the students who've actually contributed and made significant contributions to Zap, and there's quite a few of those. And lots of those have gone on to much greater things. And finally, it is really for security professionals as well. So a lot of security professionals use it, but security professionals should know about all the relevant security tools. So I would expect security professionals to just use Zap as one of their web security tools and not the only one. I'm going to talk about Zap configuration first. And the reason I'm going to talk about it is, let's first I'm going to bring up the Zap UI because as you see it, you might not be able to read this. It's a little bit small. Hopefully, I'm not going to show a great deal. And what I wanted to explain is that whenever people talk about or ask about automating Zap, I always say, get it working in the desktop UI first. That's one advantage, a really big advantage of having an automation tool that actually does have a user interface as well. So obviously, when you're automating Zap, you don't need the UI, and it's much better to run Zap without the UI in that case. but it's much easier to see things, what's going on. So I always recommend you start with testing your applications with UI. You can see what the UI looks like to Zap, so you can get an idea of of how Zap understands your app. And as soon as you get into authentication, the UI is essential, really, because it's much easier to see when things work and when they don't work. You can see the request and response much more easily. So I always recommend start with the UI and then convert that then move across to automation. But then we've seen a few people having problems with understanding what configurations needed to be moved. And that's why I was going to start off with configuration. If you know Zap, you will know that if you go to this panel here, the options, there are loads and loads of options. So where do these actually get stored? And these get stored in what we call the Zap default directory. And where is that? Well, we actually have a frequently asked question about that. So let me go to, so this is zaproxy.org. So this is the Zap homepage, and there's loads of information on here. And so if you go to documentation and then frequently asked questions, then one of the things we will have somewhere is what is the default directory that Zap uses? And we've got a fact about it because it's actually not that straightforward. So you'll see that it's different on Windows 7 or 8, Windows XP, Linux, Mac, and the weekly releases. Because we're trying to actually put Zap in the Zap configs in the right place for the right platform. So I'm actually on Mac OS. So it will be, so if I just go back, if I open a browser window, then actually you can see what I'll do is I'll actually just list that directory. So it's under the users directory, library application support, and then it's either Zap or Zap_D. And at the moment I'm using kind of the dev versions. That's why I'm using _D. And you'll see there's a load of files and directories under there. And the kind of one of the key ones is config.xml. And if we have a look at that, it is an XML file, and it has loads of stuff in it. This is essentially all of the options. And we never intended people to go and edit it, but it's useful to know. So if I just switch back to Zap, and I'll go down to the passive scanner. I don't know if you can see that, but the first thing says only scan messages in scope, and then include traffic from the fuzzer when passive scanning. And if I go back to the file, we'll see that scan only in scope is false, and scanner fuzzer messages is false. So you can see it's kind of pretty much a one-to-one mapping. Max alerts, any rule can raise 10. Yep, we've got that as well. We also see, okay, we're in the pscan thing, and then we've got confirm remove auto tag scanner. Well, that doesn't appear to be there. You can actually see we've got a different section here for passive scan tags, and we've got an option for removing without confirmation, which I've not checked, which is why I have confirm remove auto tag scanner as true. Kind of it's a negative, but hey. So you can see how these things map, and actually here we've got a section on the auto tagging scanners, and the first one is the HTML tag form. Go back here, and here's the HTML tag form. We've edited it. We'll see it's open angle brackets form is the regex, and go back here, and there's the regex encoded. So what you can see is that these configurations and pretty much everything in, I think actually everything in that you see here ends up in this file. And it's a pretty big file. And this is useful to know because if you do set anything, then these that you need to use in the UI, then these are the things you'll need to move across to your automation setup. Unfortunately, this isn't everything. And I'll try and explain why as I go through things. So what you need to do is have a look at Zap. And one of the things, if you know about Zap, is we have these things called contexts. And we have a default context with nothing in it. And we've got this option for importing and exporting contexts. So import context, you hopefully see that there are a set of contexts there. And those are ones that I've defined. We don't include any with ZAP. And if I actually go back to the command line and then actually look under ZAP and we look under context, you'll see those files. So that is where ZAP is importing them from. Well, when I say ZAP is importing them from, it doesn't import them automatically. And that's because with the ZAP settings, we assume that these are the kind of settings you want ZAP to have all of the time, whereas context define the applications you're testing. And chances are you're not testing the same applications all the time. So you can define context, you can export them here. ZAP will only import them when you tell it to. And the API works a very similar way to the UI. So if you actually want to import a context via the API, then you have to make a call to import it, even though you've actually defined the context. And that kind of works in a similar, so that's why we have the context defined in separate files. Another thing we've got is scan policies. So if you can see, I've actually got a whole set of scan policies here, and these have been imported because the scan policies define how the active scan rules work. And you can have different policies depending on the type of things you want to do. So if we go back here and we have a look at, that will be in policies. That is those set of policies. So if you define any policies as part of your automated scanning, you need to copy those across. But if you copy them across, then ZAP will load them automatically. You don't need to load them because chances are these policies will apply across multiple scans, multiple engagements, or multiple applications. And then the last one I want to mention is the plugins. So ZAP has a plugin architecture, and we've got an online marketplace where you can actually install things from, and you can actually install things from the API or the command line. But just so that you know, if we actually have a look here, then for historical reasons, actually plugin. But that is all of the add-ons that I've got installed. Now, quite a few of these are actually included in ZAP by default. So things like the active scan rules, the DOM.XS Alpha one is installed by default. Getting started definitely is. So a lot of these were installed by default anyway. But things like the Alpha scan rules I've installed, and that's where they end up. So you can actually copy add-ons into this directory directly, and then when ZAP restarts, it will actually find these things and load them. But those are the kind of things you need to worry about. So if you do set up, if you do get ZAP working with the UI for your application, which I strongly recommend you do, then those are the things you've got to think about actually moving across to your automated setup. I'm going to go talk about the different ways of actually running ZAP automation now. So the first one is the command line. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run ZAP from the command line, and it's a little bit, on the Mac it's a bit unusual, or well, not unusual, but the directory is, so essentially I've got ZAP installed under applications, then OWASP ZAP, contents Java, zap.sh. So that's just what you've got to put in. And we have a -H option, which shows you all of the available options. And for some reason on Macs, this takes a little bit of time. It takes 20 or 30 seconds to run. I'm not quite sure why that is. I know on Windows and Linux, it runs much more quickly. There's some startup thing which causes a little bit of a problem there. But any second now, it should run. And what you'll see is then ZAP gives you the usage, and we have these core options. And a few I want to kind of point out. One is these two here. So we've got the daemon option, which you'll definitely want to use when you get into automation. But we also have a command option, and that's you use one or the other. You don't use both. And that means that ZAP runs in line, does whatever you tell it to, and then exits. That is used for a couple of things, particularly for what we call the quick start options. So if I scroll down here, you will see we've got some quick start options. And while I'm here, I will actually point out a couple of configuration options here as well. So we've got this option for overriding specified key value pairs in the configuration file. And you can also, if you don't want to specify loads, you can specify as many of these as you like, but it can get unwieldy. So you can actually specify them all in a config file. And those key value pairs actually correspond exactly to the position of the parameters in the configuration file in the XML. And we actually have another fact for that. If I scroll down here, we've got how do you find which key to use to set a config value in the command line? And so because you can set anything via the config line like this, and what you need to do, basically what we recommend is to actually start ZAP in 2 different directories. But what you really need to do is you need to find a relevant config file in that. So in the config.xml, so basically for something like if you wanted to set the maximum number of alerts per rule, then what you would need to do is you would just need to specify pscans dot max alerts per rule. That's kind of what we're explaining in this file here. So that's one way, and that's why the config file is useful to understand if you actually want to set things on the command line, because the quick start is actually very limited in what it will allow you to do. What I'll do is I'll run that for you just so that you can see what happens. So the quick start you'll see we've got this option for specifying a URL, an output file, and some progress bars. So I'm going to paste the command just so I don't make a mess of it. And what it is, so again, I'm running zap.sh, quick URL, I've got budget installed locally, quick progress, and I'm using the minus command option. So this means the Zap UI won't start, we won't have a daemon either, so it's just going to run on the command line. So I will keep it off, and again, it will take a little while. But you'll see there are no other quick start options. So you can change things via the command option, the minus config or the minus config file, but it still doesn't allow you to do things like running the Ajax spider or anything like that. So it's actually if I go back to Zap a minute, then, and the reason I'm actually running Zap 2.10 in the command line, I'm running the dev version here on different ports. So the quick start is kind of very equivalent to this screen here, the automated scan screen, where you can put in the URL to attack. You will always use the traditional spider, but doesn't have an option for the Ajax spider either. But that's essentially what it's doing. And actually the traditional spider's already finished, and now the active scanner is running, and we've got 3%, 5%. I'm not going to let it finish because it won't tell you a huge amount. You'll kind of get the report. It'll take a little bit of time to run. But that is how you can run Zap from the command line inline. And this is useful, but it is kind of limited. And so that is, we don't really recommend that you use this in a production situation, whether it's against a production site or a test site or anything like that. It's kind of a quick way of getting around doing something, but it doesn't give you many options. So what we recommend is we have a set of package scans. So that is what I will talk about next. And as you can see, the first thing is a link. So if I just go back to the browser and go back to Zed Attack Proxy.org, under documentation, we have Docker details, because the package scans are all closely tied to Docker. This is kind of for historical reasons, because we needed a way to start Zap. We wanted to know where Zap was, and we had these Docker images, so it all made sense. So what we have is there's a Docker user guide, the Zap Docker user guide. So have a look at that. That explains the different Docker images. We've got a stable image, we've got weekly, we've got a live one. So, if we fix a problem, you can, within an hour of it, or actually much less now, once we fix something, you can try it out very quickly. We've got a bare bones one, which is sometimes useful in automation. And it gives a lot more information about the about the ZAP Docker images. But we then have these three types of scan, and I'll talk about the baseline first. So the baseline scan is a time-limited spider. By default, it will just for 1 minute, and then it will passive scan, and that's all it does. We kind of give the usage here, so you'll see we've got things like target, specify configuration file, and I'll scroll down. We actually have an example. I'm going to run this example, and I'm going to run it against example.com. So we go to the command line, just going to paste that in, and I've already got the image installed, sure of that. And so what will happen, we'll see some messages. So I couldn't find any custom files, which I'll talk about in a minute. And what it's going to do now, it's going to start spidering spidering example.com. And while it's doing that, I'll just switch back and have a look at some of the other options. So one of the things we can do is we can actually use, there's various things. So you can specify configuration file, I'll talk about in a minute. There's various more reporting options. With the command line, you could only generate an XML report, whereas here we've got HTML, MD, and JSON. You can include alpha passive scan rules. You can choose which port you want to listen to. There's a whole set of options. You can run the Ajax spider. You can actually specify a context file and a user, so you can do authenticated scans. And you've got a -Z option for the package scan, and you can then supply ZAP options. And those options can include the configs. So here we've got an example of the -Z, and then in quotes we've got the -config options, which then get passed to ZAP. And then they set all the options in the configuration file. If we go back to the screen, we'll see that the baseline scan is finished. So that didn't take long. I think it's like 30 seconds or maybe less than that. And what it'll tell you, example.com doesn't have many URLs, but actually tells you which rules it ran and the ones that passed first. And then when you come down here, you'll see the warnings, new warnings. So you'll see a set of potential vulnerabilities that have been reported. And we get a summary down here at the bottom. And they're kind of counted as new because what we have is we have an option to specify a progress file. So you can actually say that if there are certain vulnerabilities you know have already been reported and are being dealt with, then they can be reported in a different way. So this is actually a very useful scan, and it's one that it doesn't attack your applications, so it's actually safe to run against production sites, and it'll only take a couple of minutes at most to run, so you can run it inline in your CI/CD pipeline. When I was at Mozilla, I actually set something up so all of the websites behind Firefox, a couple of hundred of them, we ran the baseline scan against them every day, and I'm sure that's still running. And we also ran the same scan whenever an application, one of those applications was promoted from develop to staging and from staging to production. So this is a scan that is actually very quick and does provide you some information, particularly about things like security headers, anything that ZAP can find in a passive way. So this is, even though it's quite quick and doesn't do any real attacking, it's still really useful. But that's not the only one we have. We have what we call a full scan, and this does the spider, optionally an Ajax spider as well, which handles modern web applications much better. And then it does the attacking as well. So this will actually actively attack the application. Obviously, you need to have permission to attack whatever application you're pointing at. And this one will take quite a bit longer. And we also have an API scan. And this is actually, we were talking earlier about APIs. So if you've got an API which is defined by OpenAPI, SOAP, or GraphQL, then this is the one to use, because you actually specify the URL of that definition, or if you haven't got as a URL, if you've got it as a local file, you can specify that. And then ZAP will use that to explore your application, and then we'll do an active scan against it as well. This is kind of ideal for your APIs. Whether you've got a website with web UIs, that's what you'd use the full scan on, or the baseline. While I'm here, so I did mention that, could you specify any configuration parameters you like to Zap. We also have these things called scan hooks. So scan hooks are it's a Python file that you specify, and we will then call that. There are a list of hooks, so you can actually get called when anything happens within these package scans, and then you can actually do whatever you like in those hooks. So these are extremely powerful because you're basically running essentially on the command line. You can make calls to other services. You can make API calls to Zap. You can do whatever you like. So the scan hooks really make the package scans much more flexible. While I'm here, I will mention Webswing as well, because what we have is with the Docker images, obviously you don't have a UI, which is a bit of a pain. Obviously, you know, if you want to do automation, you don't need the UI. If you're trying to work out what's going on, the UI is really useful. And there's a really great product called Webswing, and they've given us a free version, which we can include with Zap. So we actually have a Webswing interface, which means you can actually drive the Zap browser in. So the Zap interface, the Swing UI in a browser, which is really powerful and really cool. So that is kind of what I was going to talk about with the package scans. And what I was going to go on to next, it kind of leads fairly well into, is the GitHub Actions, because the GitHub Actions actually use the package scans. So what I'll do is I'm going to go across to the GitHub Marketplace. This is the GitHub Marketplace, and a lot of the time you actually see, one of the Zap scans is there. But if it's not, or you want to see all of them, search for OWASP or Zap, and you will see the GitHub Actions. So we have two at the moment, one for the baseline, one for the full scan. We haven't got an API one yet. We'll definitely look at doing that. And so what this means is these are just wrappers around those package scans which run in Docker. It kind of makes it even easier because instead of you using your own infrastructure, you're using GitHub's infrastructure. They have got a target, the Docker name. So by default, we'll use the stable version, but you can use the weekly if you want, or the live one if you really want. And actually, one thing I forgot to mention was the rules. So let me go back. Go back to the baseline scan, because one thing I forgot to mention was this config file. Because one of the things you can do with the package scans is you can actually define how the rules run and which rules run. So the configuration file, which you can generate from the package scans as well, will give you a list of all of the rules you have available if you generate it. And then by default, Zap will warn on them. What you can do is you can just edit that file and you can change them. Either you can change them to ignore. So there's a particular rule you're not interested in, you're not worried about. You know that it's not a security problem for you. Just change something to suspicious comments. If you're not worried about those, change that to ignore. If you actually really worry about cookies without using a secure flag, change that to a failed. And that will then, the package scans will fail with different values, and you can differentiate between the warnings and the failures. So that's a config file, and that works on all of the scans. Obviously, it kind of depends which rules you got installed as to which ones you'll have access to. With the baseline scan, it'll only be the passive ones, whereas the API and the active scan will have all of the attacking rules as well, the active scan rules as well. So you can actually specify when you go to the actions, you can specify a rule file as well, so you can specify these things. And once more, you can specify command line options. So these will go through to the relevant scripts, and then the ones which apply to Zap can go through to Zap. But something on top of one of the things that the GitHub Actions provide is they will actually raise issues for you. So what will happen is if you configure the title and a token, so obviously you've got to specify a token which will allow you to raise issues, then what will happen is that Zap will raise issues. And here we've got examples. Actions will record the issues they've raised, so you won't keep on getting the same issue raised again. We'll have one issue. I think there's an option whether you have one issue or actual, or whether it just raises one per problem, but it'll actually report all the alerts. And the thing is, when you actually fix these things and Zap confirms you fix them, then the action will actually automatically update the issue if it's partly complete. And when it's completely finished and fixed, then the action will actually complete. It will close the issue. So this is actually really powerful. And we've actually got a couple of blog posts on these. So if you go to the Zap website, and you have a look at the blog. No, it wasn't too far long ago. We have dynamic application security testing with Zap and GitHub Actions. So that's the active scan one. And then we've got the passive scan one as well. And they weren't tagged, which is why I didn't notice it. So we've got full details. And what we actually do here is we explain exactly how we use them here ourselves. So we are using these actions to test zaproxy.org, of course. So you've got a working example that you can follow, that we explain exactly how that works in these blog posts. So if you've got public application and you've got GitHub repo associated with it, or you can create a GitHub repo associated with it, then you can actually set these things up. And these repos can be private as well. So as long as you've got set the action up with a token that allows it to access the right repo, then you can raise issues against that. So that is the two GitHub actions we got. As I said, they wrap around the package scans. Now, the package scans, they work by, we have Docker images, and what the package scans do is they start Zap in these Docker images, and they start Zap in daemon mode, and then they actually use the Zap API to interact with it. And so if you're using the package scan or the GitHub actions, you're already using Zap in Docker, Zap in daemon mode, and with the API as well. But you can do that yourself as well. So what you can do is you can start Zap, and whether it's in Docker or locally or any other container you want, type of container, you can then access it via the Zap API. And the Zap API is very powerful. If I go to documentation, we'll see we've got API details. And we've got one of our newer contributors added all of these. So we've got a huge amount of documentation about the API. So it goes all the way through to introduction, exploring the application, attacking the application, getting results, and then details of all the different API calls. Really, what you got to think about is it's very similar to driving Zap by the UI. The UI is kind of maps down to the kind of data structures and functionality that Zap provides. And so, not surprisingly, the API is similar to the UI because it's trying to do the same things. So this is another reason why I say it's really good to get used to the Zap UI and to try out testing with the Zap UI first, even if you're doing all of automated testing, because then it's much easier to translate that into API calls. Get used to the UI, and then you will be able to, we've nearly got a complete set of API calls that match the UI. There are a few things that are outstanding. So fuzzing is one. We need to add API for that. There are a few little things. But in general, if you can do it by the API, and particularly if it's something that is kind of an automated tool in the UI, then there will be an API call for it. And if not, then just let us know and we'll do our best to fix that. And actually, Zap has a very powerful scripting interface, and you can actually add scripts which then provide more API endpoints. So you can do pretty much whatever you like via the API. It is incredibly powerful. And what I'll actually do is go back to the browser. Then if you point your browser directly at Zap, then just point it straight at Zap, then you'll get this page. And the first link is to the local API. And this allows, it's kind of very simple web interface on top of it. You can say, okay, there's the spider. What kind of information can I get from the spider API? And what kind of actions can I do? And you can actually kick off a scan. So if you actually want to perform a scan on, so let's go. scan budget, no maximum children, recurse true, and kick off scan. You'll see there, and there you go. It ran already. So, and it didn't find anything because I haven't got it running. But basically, this interface allows you to run things very quickly. So you can try out the API, you can see how it works, and you can see how it affects. And as you see, you can run it with the Zap desktop there as well, and you can see how things are working. So you can actually essentially test the API in the same way that you would in daemon mode, but having the UI there as well. So that is the API, and that's all the stuff I'm going to demo. But there is one more thing I want to talk about, and that is something called the automation framework. And this is something we're actually working on right now. And the idea of the automation framework is actually it's a new way to drive Zap. And what this actually does is it will allow you to do all the things you can do in the Docker containers, but without having to use the Docker containers if you don't want to. So it's kind of going to replace the package scans. We'll change them to call this new framework, but it means that it'll actually be much more powerful. So the idea is we have an early version of this working. We haven't released anything yet, but everything will be defined in a YAML file. So there'll be a new Zap add-on, which will actually implement all of this. So it does exist already. And the first part of the YAML file will define the contexts. So as you can see here, I'm defining budget context with URL. You'll be able to include things, you'll be able to exclude things. This should make a lot of sense, match what you need to do in Zap. For those of you who already know how to use Zap, it will cover authentication, but probably not in the first option. And you'll be able to have various options about how the jobs will run. And then what will happen is you define the jobs. So one of the things you'll be able to install, you'll be able to update add-ons, you'll be able to install add-ons, you'll be able to configure the passive scanning. So here we've got maximum number of alerts per rule. You'll be able to define things like thresholds for individual rules if you want to override default settings. And then you'll be able to run the spider, the active scanner, the Ajax spider, import API endpoints. You'll be able to do all of these things via a set of jobs. And the thing is, this one file will define everything. So you won't need to specify anything via config parameters. You won't need to specify the rule configs via a separate tab-separated file. Everything will be defined in here. And you'll be able to actually change the order. So if you actually want to run the Ajax spider before the traditional spider, you can do that. If you want to run the spider twice using different starting points, you'll be able to do that. If you want to run the active scan several times with different endpoints and with different scan profiles, you'll be able to do that. It's ambitious, but the idea is that it will actually be the standard way for automating Zap. We won't get rid of the package scans. They will be changed to use this framework, but we will make this framework available directly. So things like the actions, I think we'll just be able to specify one of these automation framework configuration files, and that will do everything that you want it to do. So the actions will do that. And the API certainly isn't going away. We're not going to get rid of it, but it will be something that I think even less people will need to use it. The API will still be there, we'll carry on enhancing it, but the framework will actually be an easier way to automate. The other plan is that will be an easier way to automate that. And that is everything that I wanted to go through in this session. So if you want to find out more, everything is on zaproxy.org. We've got links to, let me switch back to that just to, so you can see. So we've got the blog there, we've got loads of videos. So I'm actually recording a whole set of So I've done a load of Zap in 10 videos. I've actually got, I'm now recording a set of Zap deep dives videos in conjunction with StackHawk. So these are 20 to 30 minute videos about Zap, and I'm doing pretty much one a week. And so a lot's going to move. We're adding a lot there. Got loads of documentation and loads of links to the community as well. So if you want to get in touch, we've got a user group, got developer group, got IRC, there is evangelists, loads of good stuff on there. So that is everything I wanted to go through.
What kind of stuff do you run into as far as your experience with people using this in an enterprise environment? I mean, what other tools are they integrating with to make this part of their overall secure software development lifecycle?
Great question. And one of the main answers is, I wish I knew. We actually get very little feedback. You know, a few people get it. I mean, people get in touch. You know, some people say thanks, some people report problems. But in general, I mean, I've found that it's often been the case when I go to physically, you know, we used to go to these conferences a long time ago, it seems. So when I'm meeting people and people say, oh, we use Zap for this, that, and the other. And it's like, oh, great, it's great to know this. And usually that's the first time I hear about it. So, yeah, I would love to know more. We're starting to get a little bit of information. We've got a Zap questionnaire, user questionnaire. So, you know, we want to know how people are using it. We want to know what features people want us to focus on in Zap. But I mean, I think, you know, Zap is clearly one part of the security picture, the automated testing. But, you know, DAST is one aspect. And I think DAST is really important because it's kind of the attacker's view of your application. This is how you're being attacked. But SAST, software analysis, static analysis, is really important as well. And that's, you know, if you're in a closed source environment, you're one step ahead of the attackers. Hopefully the attackers don't have your source code. So you can actually do the scanning of your source code and fix these problems, you know, without the attackers having that inside knowledge. SCA, the software composition analysis, and managing your dependencies, clearly that's absolutely essential as well. So these are very different aspects that you need to be concerned about. And, you know, Zap is one part of your, you know, it's something that you need to be using, but it's definitely not the silver bullet. And it's also, you know, it is not a replacement for manual testing. You know, we ain't going to do manual pen testers out of a job. If you've got an application that is, you know, security critical and important to your company, you should be getting it manually pen tested. The advantage of using tools like Zap is you're raising the bar, you're getting rid of the low-hanging fruit. If you don't use Zap on your web application or similar tools, and you get the pen testers in, they're going to really be reporting trivial stuff, and you're wasting your money, you know, to be fair. You know, we had great fun. When I was at Mozilla, I helped, with the bug bounty program and also arranged the pen tests of the services behind Firefox. And it was actually great watching the pen testers come in all confident and then not find anything. And wow, they worked. And they found some great vulnerabilities, but they worked for them. You know, so you want to see a pen tester work really hard. Give them an application where they can't find vulnerabilities. They hate that. They really hate that.
Yeah,
so, you know, so make sure you get the low-hanging fruit and you'll get real value out of your pen testers.